everyone, it's Abby. I'm going to continue looking at the German POWs. Particularly looking at JSTOR was quite interesting this week, primarily because there were so many articles that I didn't have access to as I was previously researching. Only one that I found specifically focused on Michigan, but given the industries involved and the relationships formed with these other articles talk about, generalities can pretty much be sent and stated about the POWs in Michigan. One particular article was written by Lauren Hahn, and she looked at the letters and photos that the German POWs are in with a local farmer from Eau Claire, Michigan named Teichmann. He developed really personal relationships with his POWs, primarily because he actually spoke German and understood their culture. One very telling image that he had a very personal relationship is the fact that he has a photo of 6 POWs that are sitting around enjoying a very nice lunch prepared by his wife, and in the image is his daughter. And there's even one POW that's crouching next to her with his arm around him. So it's a very, very poignant image. I may have it in my file somewhere if anyone would actually like to see it. In addition, which we actually did in Michigan, we actually put the POWs to work in the logging industry as well as in the orchards. James Finkel in particular looks at the logging industry in regards to putting the POWs to work. And one of his main components was to see whether or not the United States actually adhered to the Geneva Convention and whether or not they had a language barrier as a result of it. Now, putting the POWs to work was due to a severe labor shortage that we had. According to the Geneva Convention, you can put regular soldiers to work, but you can't do the commissioned officers and the NCOs. It was optional. However, it specifically states that they cannot do anything dangerous, and logging, by the nature of the job, is extremely dangerous, thus proving the U.S. didn't necessarily fully adhere to the Geneva Convention at the time. Now, we did allow them the ability to work, which alleviated a lot of their boredom, so they were quite happy with that. But Finkel also notes that there was a severe language barrier, which is very common. Most of the POWs spoke German or a subsidiary of German, whereas in America, most people spoke English and very few actually knew the German language. So it was a lot of a learning curve. In addition to that, Barbara Heisler had a very interesting article, which I hadn't read, but I had a suspicion was very true, that after experiencing being in America, observing the American way of life, many of the POWs actually decided to come back to the United States. And her article specifically focuses on that and why they came back to the United States. Her conclusions overall was that having observed this, having seen democracy, they realized it was better, and this further fueled their desire to immigrate. All three of these sources heavily look at letters, photos, archival sources, census records. But one common theme that I have seen is a secondary source written by Arnold Kramer. He published a book in the 1970s entitled Nazi Prisoners of War in America, and it was one of the first comprehensive studies in regards to the German POWs in America. I have a copy of the book myself. It's quite interesting. An interesting subset of that is that we really only have one POW who escaped U.S. custody, and he eluded capture until 1984, when after the publication of Kramer's book, he contacted Kramer and said, "I am the prisoner of war who escaped. This is my name. This is my information." And he actually turned himself in. He then subsequently went on to write a book of telling his story. but he was the only prisoner of war we actually didn't repatriate back after the end of the war. Additionally, you do have an author named Matthias Rees who looked at the psychological aspects of the prisoners of war. I've used his articles in the past. It is quite interesting. He noted that the German prisoners of war actually thought that the African American soldiers who were facing discrimination were almost like prisoners themselves because, for example, the German prisoners who looked just like American soldiers could ride in front of a train, receive food, receive clothing. It was much harder for the African American POWs, the African American GIs. Along with that, because the POWs looked so much like the American boys that had been shipped overseas, American employers had a very hard time separating the, for lack of a better word, racial aspect and masculine aspect uh, from the Nazi stereotype that had been propagated. Overall, they all use very similar sources, very similar methodologies. There's only so many ways that this really can be looked at almost 80 years on, but it is a very interesting subject. If anyone has any questions, please reach out, and I hope you enjoyed this video and have a great week. Thanks.